Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and of course, we're going to have an incredible episode today, and we're not taking the holiday off, or the alleged holiday off. We're working on this Juneteenth, or the day after Juneteenth, even though many companies and, of course, the federal government are taking the day off to honor this new and sacred holiday we have. And guess what we're going to talk about today first? It's, of course, going to be Juneteenth. And you saw some of the celebrations that happened over this weekend, this honoring the holiday. And boy, did they honor the holiday. In D.C., there was a mass shooting that left, I believe the death toll is now up to 2. And it also wounded a police officer and several other people. And the video clips showing it from are very magical, to say the least. They're also, once again, all these magical Americans are on cars dancing, and then suddenly somebody starts shooting over a brawl. And as these things happen, we see that time and time again. There's also clips, several similar clips, not with the shooting, but also crazy clips coming from other areas of the country. I think there was one from Chicago that I tweeted out where all these blacks surrounded a elderly white man's car and began dancing on his car and jumping up and down and going crazy and acting like this is the greatest thing ever that they're doing. And the elderly white man is befuddled by the experience that he is seeing on top of his car. And so this is now an important holiday that goes for America, is that, you know, in the same way that July 4th and even Christmas, that if it occurs on a day where, you know, if it occurs on a weekend, people are going to get the following business day off when it happens. And that's now the case with Juneteenth. It's that important of a holiday for people. And as I've argued last year for the last, when it was first ushered in as a federal holiday, I said that this would eventually replace July 4th, or they wanted to replace July 4th. You know, we now have 2 Independence Days, and Juneteenth is celebrated as a Juneteenth Independence Day, as long with our July 4th is our Independence Day. And really, what is going to be the Independence Day that's going to take priority? And I argued last year that it would probably be Juneteenth eventually, because one, it happens first in the summer, and when companies are deciding what days to give people vacation off, or for towns that are deciding what resources to dedicate to a parade or festivities, they decide, I think over time, that they're going to decide that Juneteenth is going to have to be the holiday they're going to have to honor, because one, they don't want to look like racist, and you know, it comes up first, so first come, first serve when it comes to holidays in some respects. And so I think it'll take precedence over time. But there's always been arguments saying that it's the more important Independence Day. It's the real day that it celebrates our values and honors who we strive to be. And there was an article that was written in Time magazine over the weekend, or published in Time magazine over the weekend, by a descendant of Teddy Roosevelt, Kermit Roosevelt. I think he goes by Kermit Roosevelt III, but I'm trying to figure out his lineage. On Wikipedia, it lists him as the son of Kermit Roosevelt Jr. Kermit Roosevelt was one of Teddy Roosevelt's sons. I think he was the second oldest, and he had a son, Teddy Roosevelt was Jr., who was born in 1916. And then Wikipedia claims that Teddy Roosevelt III is his son, but Teddy Roosevelt III is born in like the early 70s, and it's like, you know, and also Teddy Roosevelt Jr. married his wife in like the 30s. So I think it's more his grandson. I don't know. He might be the 4th rather than 3rd. But even though he lists himself as the 3rd on his biographies that are attached to his academic page, he's a University of Pennsylvania law professor. So this guy has some credibility when he writes, and the argument is saying that Juneteenth is a better expression of our values than July 4th. Now, I really like the cover image for this, or the featured image for this article. On the left side is John Trumbull's famous signing of the Declaration of Independence. You know, all the white guys, all the base guys are there. John Hancock, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin. You know, you're seeing all the real founders. And on the right is Biden signing into law the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act. And he's got pretty much, he's only got like 2 white people around him. And then he's got all these black lawmakers, Kamala Harris, James Clyburn, a couple of other people. I think one of the white guys is John Gordon standing behind him, who's like the one Republican who is eagerly supporting the bill or the idea to make it a federal holiday. And now there's some great nuggets in this article about why we should care more about Juneteenth than the Declaration, or why we should care more about Juneteenth than the July 4th. And he's arguing that the Declaration of Independence is too much of a document that is celebrating disunion and separatism, and that the Juneteenth is celebrating the Emancipation Proclamation, and even though it's not celebrating the actual date it was issued on, it's celebrating it being declared to the slaves in Texas, and that the Emancipation Proclamation is a better expression of American freedom than the Declaration of Independence. And so here's what he says. The Declaration, remember, is fundamentally about disunion. That is secession. The theory of the Declaration is that governments are formed for certain purposes, deriving legitimacy from consent, and that if they threaten those purposes, people may withdraw their consent and alter or abolish the government. This is precisely what the South was doing, and Lincoln's response was to deny their right to alter the government and to impose on them an authority to which they did not consent. Does the Declaration of Independence support the people who are declaring their independence, or those who suppress independence by force of arms? If we're being honest, that's not a close call. And so this is real bad. We can't support secession. And he says, he goes on to another reason that we should not like July 4th is the Confederates like July 4th. The real relationship between Juneteenth and July 4th is closer to inversion than completion. Juneteenth is the flip side of July 4th. July 4th celebrates the right of people to form their own political communities and make their own laws, including, if they want, laws that enslave people who are outsiders to those communities. During the Civil War, the Confederates honored July 4th as fervently as the Union and proclaimed themselves the loyal inheritors of the principles of Independence Day. Juneteenth, by contrast, celebrates the conquest and destruction of those enslaver governments in the name of universal freedom. And so if you're saying he's arguing this into those who say that Juneteenth is a part of the same spirit and the same narrative line the Declaration is. That Juneteenth is the fulfillment of the principles and ideas and values found within the Declaration of Independence. And Kermit Roosevelt says, no way, no way, sirree. That is not the case. He sees the Declaration of Independence and the 13 colonies breaking away from the British Empire as part of enslaving people, as that it did not bring freedom to the slaves here, and that's why we shouldn't necessarily celebrate it as an expression of freedom. And he goes along with, he's saying that they're deprived of freedom. He did say that he does, and he's, undermining the revolutionary mythos by saying this. The revolution, on the other hand, did bring freedom to tens of thousands of enslaved people. But that was mostly because the war afforded them an opportunity to escape their enslavement and find freedom with the British. The British issued multiple emancipation proclamations, and their practice of freeing enslaved people is the last and gravest charge the Declaration levies against King George. He is encouraging domestic insurrections, by which the signers meant slave revolts. When the revolution concluded with the Treaty of Paris, the victorious patriots demanded the return of formerly enslaved people. When the British defied that obligation, the Americans pursued it for years. And so this is, the real Declaration of Independence was tainted by racism and oppression of others. And he goes on to say some other things. I'm mainly reading this, but there are so many good lines that I want to articulate how people are eventually going to see Juneteenth compared to July 4th. And this is not like a fringe outlier person. Yeah, maybe it's not like front page in the New York Times, but this is like a respectable, academic who fairly moderate credentials, is a descendant of Theodore Roosevelt, I think great-great-grandson. And this is somebody who's a part of the elite. And this is an argument you could see very well articulated by many people. And he's arguing against what, more the moderates and centrists, the type of people like John Cornyn and Republicans who say that we celebrate Juneteenth for fulfilling the ideas and principles of the Declaration of Independence, and he's simply saying, no, that's not correct. We should see Juneteenth as our main Independence Day. So going on with reading more great passages from this essay, Kermit Roosevelt says, the states won the revolution and we identify with the rebels of 1776. The nation won the Civil War and we generally also identify with the government that defeated the rebels of 1861, though not as strongly or completely as we should. But this creates deep instability in American identity. A house divided cannot stand, as said Lincoln, and we cannot be on both sides of this war and still be one nation. We must pick a side. What we need to ask ourselves is, who are the real heroes of the American story? The Revolutionary Patriots, fighting for their state's independence but complaining that their enemies were freeing the people they enslaved, or the Civil War Americans who fought to bring individual freedom to others? I'll continue on. I got to finish it up. This is a concluding paragraph. If we believe our own rhetoric about liberty and equality, the answer is that we subscribe to the values of the Civil War rather than the Revolution. We believe in the Constitution that was forced on the defeated South in Reconstruction, not the one ratified by 13 states in the founding. And Juneteenth expresses our values far better than does the 4th of July. And so that is the opinion of Kermit Roosevelt. And I say, really want to repeat that by the standards of liberalism, there is not much you can dispute with this. And they do like to undermine more of the revolutionary story with July 4th. Vox published a few years ago, this thing is like why the British were... I'm going to be paraphrasing what the exact words, but why the British Empire was more progressive than we were. And it basically said that they freed slaves earlier. They were nicer to the Indians. They had all these nice things and nice liberal things that America didn't pursue until much later after the British. And also the Americans were cruelly killing Indians. Like, how could they do that? I mean, they're just so peaceful and had never heard of war before. And how dare they fight them over their land? And so this is the ideas that are coming with it. And this also goes along with the 1619 Project. Is the 1619 Project wants to displace the usual figures of American history, the usual heroes and legends, and just simply say that the story of America is evil white people serving as the villains against heroic non-whites, and the non-whites are those who made us realize our values and upheld our principles and actually fulfilled them, while whites were just simply writing them down and not actually practicing them, and they're actually the villains. As in the story of 1619 Project, Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote All Men Are Created Equal, is turned into a villain. He is an evil man who was a slaver, and he was a rapist, and he's just an evil racist, and we just can't honor him anymore. We have to rename high schools who honor him and carry his name, and we just can't allow him to be honored in our contemporary society. And they go on against all the founders and others, and really it just seems to be that we deny the capacity and the actual people who founded this country and who created it and made it a great country, and then we replace it with another group of people who were not the ones who were founding this country, who were not the ones who created it, who were not the ones at the Constitutional Convention, who were more likely to fight on the side of the British than they were to fight on the Patriot side in the Revolutionary War and in the War of 1812. And even when it came to the Civil War, we're not even responsible for their own freedom, but we turn it into this story as that they freed themselves and that they were the ones who really made America achieve the principles and promises found in the Declaration of Independence. But even with Kermit Roosevelt, he's saying, the Declaration of Independence is a tainted document. He doesn't even mention the allusion to merciless savages, which is in that same paragraph in the Declaration of Independence as domestic insurrectionists. And he's simply saying this is a racist document that upholds slavery, which in original draft, Thomas Jefferson actually condemned slavery, but that was taken out. But now we see more the Gettysburg Address as a better representation of American democracy and American values and American national identity. And he simply says, or not simply says, but he says that American national identity would be better served to replace Juneteenth or replace July 4th with Juneteenth. And I think that argument is going to carry more weight over time, as is, because to a lot of the non-whites who will eventually make up a majority of America, they don't see themselves when they look up at George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, John Adams. They see a bunch of dead white men who need to be replaced, and they'd much rather see, they may even see themselves in Abraham Lincoln, but even though Abraham Lincoln statues are being taken down, like Boston took down an Abraham Lincoln statue because, a black man was kneeling to him in that statue, and that's racist. In other places, they vandalize and attack Abraham Lincoln statues because he ordered the execution of Indians who had been butchering white people. So he can't even be honored, but they see him more in that because what he expressed in the Gettysburg Address and what he did as the great emancipator is more in line with how America wants to see itself, more than the patriots who fought and died to give us independence in the Revolutionary War, and at the same time then crafted a Citizenship Act, or the first Naturalization Act, that limited it to free white persons of good character, and did not see the entire world as part of their body politic. They simply saw the colonists, who were primarily Anglo, as the body politic, and that the reason why that they declared independence is that the British Empire was violating their rights as Englishmen, and that they were fighting for their rights as Englishmen, not just some abstract concept they came up with in a vacuum, that this came from a distinct legacy and lineage from the colonial days and the settlers who built this country. And we want to deny that. Instead, just these great liberal humanistic values built this country, and we deny the place of the people who actually built it. We just simply want to say it was ideas, and if we have to attribute any credit to them, we find it in non-whites, particularly blacks. And that is the meaning of Juneteenth, and it furthers along the 1619 project of replacing our heritage with a new artificial one crafted by people like Nicole Hannah-Jones and other radicals. And what these people want us to associate Juneteenth with is the need for reparations. There were several articles published last year and this year about connecting the holiday to reparations and the need for it. There's a Vox article that was published and a couple of others, and I'm sure the New York Times and Washington Post had a few that were demanding this. And the whole purpose of the holiday is to demonize whites as the villains of American history, and to see and to promote the myths of black innocence and black heroism, and that blacks are the true founding fathers of this country and not Anglo-Saxons and the people who came here in 1607 and 1620 and throughout the 17th century to found this country out of a wilderness, to tame a wilderness, and to fight the savages who were already here. That is not what they want us to think. That is what they're creating, a new national mythos around the need for reparations. And so when Republicans celebrate this holiday and they see it as, oh, it's a fulfillment of our founding principles, that is actually quite wrong, because liberals are telling them, no, here's what it's about. It's actually superior to July 4th. The values and principles upheld by Juneteenth are superior to those of July 4th. And also, if you're celebrating this holiday, this is a reason to remember how evil white people are and why they need to pay reparations. And that is the meaning of Juneteenth. And Republicans need to stop sending out Happy Juneteenth tweets and start actually trying to repeal this holiday that is an abomination, that is a direct affront and a direct attack on his heritage and America's and true American national identity. And so those are my thoughts on Juneteenth. So this is going to be another episode where we're jumping around from topic to topic. We've got a few topics to cover. I don't think they're all going to be as long as the last subject, but we will see. This may be a very long episode. The next topic, it's also me reading from another article. I hope you guys love my readings. The so-called national conservatives, people like Yoram Hazony and his Edmund Burke Foundation, issued a manifesto of sorts, or a statement of principles last week in American Conservative. And I want to discuss that. It obtained a lot of high-profile signatures to it. They have Michael Anton, Peter Thiel for some reason. A lot of the Claremont people have signed on to it, and I don't think any senators or lawmakers signed on to it. Of course, our good friend David Reboy signed on to it. I mean, that is based having David Reboy on. For those who haven't followed me on Twitter, David Reboy has been very mad at me over the last few weeks and trying to ankle bite at me simply because I pointed out he's 5'5", and yes, he is 5'5". One of these weird guys. I mean, yes, this is off a tangent, but he always likes to claim he's 5'8". But I know several people who have met him and said that he is no taller than 5'5". And he's always insists he's like 5'8". There's even a picture of him with Ron DeSantis, who's like 5'9", and then Reed Boy is nowhere near to his head, is like well below his neck, and when they're standing next to each other. So I don't know how that guy could be 5'8", but I digress. A lot of people need to compensate for their deficiencies. But he is signed up there, and I guess that means they're all ready for Ron DeSantis and Heavy D, and that they think that this is what national conservatism is going to be. So it has a lot of high-profile signatures who are signed up for it and are supporting it. There's like dozens of people, and there's even some people from more mainstream conservative groups outside of Claremont. For the more establishment, there's a few people who believe are Heritage Foundation people and others who are of similar caliber. And now when this grand statement of principles presents itself as an alternative to conservatism and a breakaway from the classic conservatism and the conservative Inc. orthodoxy that it presents itself. And it really just comes down to a standard National Review line on every subject, from foreign policy, on race, and even on immigration. And one thing people don't realize is that National Review has actually been pretty good on immigration. They have always been, the party line in National Review has always been immigration restrictionism. Some people don't want to acknowledge it. They'll point out there's this column, that there's this essay, it seems like they're more for liberal immigration policy, and they're cucks. Yes, they're cucks, and they are, pathetic in many ways, but they've always been for immigration restriction as a general party line, as that is the standard. Whenever the editors issue something about immigration, it's generally being on the right side on the issue. And main problems come from how they deal with race, how they deal with Trump, how they deal with any challenges to the status quo, and especially how they go about with foreign policy. And many of these are just recapitulations of what they already said, of what Conservative Inc. has already said. And you wouldn't have seen, if National Review had come up with their own version of nationalism, which they were trying to do during the Trump era, Rich Lowry wrote some stupid book on the case for nationalism, and really his type of nationalism came down to just being standard Connick nonsense, and that's what he was articulating. And really, when you look at the statement of principles, there's real no difference between them, except they're using the term globalism more. They're using, liberal hegemony, and they're trying to use things and liberal universalism, and they're using phrases and words that maybe National Review and Connick wouldn't have used 4 or 5 years ago, but they're saying this. So it's really just Connick dressed up in newer terms, and most of these are really pretentious and pompous in how they present themselves. So I'll read some of these statements of principles to show how uninspiring it is, and most importantly, how it is not really dissident right, and it doesn't really get the Trumpist moment. So it has 10 principles that are outlined in the statement. 1, national independence. 2, rejection of imperialism, globalism. 3, national government. 4, God and public religion. 5, the rule of law. 6, free enterprise. Now that's a real radical concept that conservatives have never talked about. 7, public research. 8, family and children. 9, immigration. And 10, race. The first one is pretty good about we believe in... I'll say this. We wish to see a world of independent nations. Each nation capable of self-government should chart its own course in accordance with its own particular constitutional, linguistic, and religious inheritance. I do find the lack of culture, and of course they're not going to mean ethnic inheritance, but, they believe in strong borders. It's okay. Now, here's what comes down to rejection of imperialism and globalism. There's this line, which you should set off some alarm bells. We reject imperialism in its various contemporary forms. We condemn the imperialism of China, Russia, and other authoritarian powers, but we also oppose the liberal imperialism of the last generation, which sought to gain power and influence and wealth by dominating other nations and trying to remake them in its own image. So the last part is fine, but then if you're wanting to challenge the imperialism of China and Russia, what else are you using besides the imperialism of the globalist American empire to challenge them? So you have to figure out whether you're on that. And even some of the stuff that they say about the national government and national states, A lot of it resembles like Wilsonianism, like we believe in national self-determination, and all these people hate Woodrow Wilson, and yet they're echoing his statements on national self-determination, and that the way we really see the ideal world is one of these independent nation states standing up against imperialism. But as we see in Ukraine, and all these guys generally are on the Ukraine side, is that they depend on a great power to defend them. They can't defend themselves on their own. And so these little nation states just act as little antique shops where, they get to practice their language and their customs and stuff, but they cannot defend their own sovereignty, and they're not really sovereign states because they depend on outside help to defend themselves and from another great power. And we see this in Ukraine. We see this throughout Europe. All these little tiny states cannot maintain their own independence. They depend on America and they depend on NATO to maintain their borders and to maintain their legitimacy. And if they can't do that on their own, that undermines their concept of sovereignty and their idea of independence. So I don't necessarily go along with that. Some of the other things, it's like standard conservative stuff about God and religion, family and children, believe in stable traditional families. So we'll just talk about 9 and 10. Now, the immigration principle is pretty good. It's not as bad. It's even probably a little bit better than the typical conservative fare, and it's not just strictly about economics. So I'll read that in full. Immigration has made immense contributions to the strength and prosperity of Western nations. That's probably the worst part. But going back to the quote, but today's penchant for uncontrolled and unassimilated immigration has become a source of weakness and instability, not strength and dynamism, threatening internal dissension and ultimately dissolution of the political community. We note that Western nations have benefited from both liberal and restrictive immigration policies at various times. We call for much more restrictive policies until these countries summon the wit to establish more balanced, productive, and assimilationist policies. Restrictive policies may sometimes include a moratorium on immigration. So, going along with that, yeah, it's nice that they're supporting the ideas of like a moratorium and more, and they do seem to be fully in favor of restrictive, but they dance around it and they spend half the time talking about how awesome immigration has been for Western nations. It's been immense contributions to the strength and prosperity of Western nations. Maybe that's the case, but why do you have to put that down? I think if you're wanting to, a real nationalist would say mass immigration threatens Western nations. That would how it start off. You don't need any concessions to the other side saying, oh, it's been so good in the past. Sometimes liberal immigration policies have been to our benefit, and maybe we need to consider restrictionism. No, you need to simply demand immigration restriction. Mass immigration is a threat to Western nations, and we must halt it if we want to survive. That's all you need to say. And it's like this mealy-mouth language that's designed to not look very extreme and moderate and reasonable. And it's sort of endorsing restrictionist policies, but not really. And, it is a little bit better that they're not simply saying that it's all economics. A lot of populist ink types like to say that it's threatening to workers, and that's the only reason why we hate immigration or we oppose immigration. But it's not just that. It's a threat to our culture and our way of life and to our national identity, and that's why we oppose mass immigration, and it's a threat. Now, the race thing is really bad. I'll quote it. We believe that all men are created in the image of God and that public policy should reflect that. No person's worth or loyalties can be judged by the shape of his features, the color of his skin, or the results of a lab test. The history of racialist ideology and oppression and its ongoing consequences require us to emphasize this truth. We condemn the use of state and private institutions to discriminate and divide us against one another on the basis of race. The cultural sympathies encouraged by decent nationalism offer a sound basis for conciliation and unity among diverse communities. The nationalism we espouse respects and indeed combines the unique needs of a particular minority communities and the common good of the nation as a whole. So you could have written that as a Democrat in the 2000s, and it would have been the same thing. Every Democrat, the Democratic platform could have had that statement on race in its 2000 campaigns. This is what is the point of putting this in there? This is just signaling that you support the basics of liberalism, and you simply just change some of the language and go around it and say, oh, we're new and radical. But when it comes to race, is like, we don't see race. Everyone's equal. And we have to acknowledge how awful our racism has been in the past. And a real nationalism combines us together. Let's go. Well, yeah. With unity among diverse communities, diversity is a strength. That's what it's implying here. So what is even the point of like promoting this? So all this is just like standard conservative tripe, and it's dressed up in just new language, and it's using nationalism. And really what the nationalism is just standard conservative ink. It's nothing new and different. It's nothing that it's about the Trump moment. And it's not even like aggressive. It's too like, pansy. It's too weak-willed. Like it's statement on immigration. Like say what you mean. Say that it's a threat. Do not talk about how great it is in your statement of principles. If somebody's looking up what you think about it on immigration, and half of it is concessions to liberal viewpoints on what immigration is, and that all you can do is have a half-hearted, lukewarm, and possible endorsement of restrictionism, you don't even specifically spell out that you support restrictionism. What is the point of it? And when your race statement is essentially what American dogma on race was up until like 2016, and the liberal dogma, let me remind you of that. This is what liberals were teaching us when we were in elementary school and middle school and high school, if you were a millennial. And you're simply presenting this as like, wow, radical idea. We're going to teach about how evil America's racialist ideology is to school children. Wow, that is so brilliant and new and different. That's what nationalism is about. And so this is really what it comes down to. And there's this real weakness that comes about with all these new right, populist ink type stuff and national populism that's always promoted and gets like a fair hearing in the mainstream media, and they get these puff pieces, is that it always comes down I always use this phrase, but when push comes to shove, when they're directed on these issues, like, what do you believe about race? What do you believe about immigration? What do you believe about American national identity? What do you believe about the founding? And they all come out on the side of standard conservative ink stuff. It's like when the 1776 commission that Donald Trump had, where he hired Hillsdale and Claremont people to write. And what did they say? They said America is just an idea, and it's based on liberty and equality. Standard conservative tripe, standard stuff that liberals would have said in the 90s and 2000s. It was a return to Bill Clinton liberalism. Brilliant idea. And it's the same with this stuff. Whenever they ask about race, it's like, well, we don't see race, but really what we've done wrong to all these other races require us to make amends. And they sort of sometimes imply that they need to make reparations. No, that's not what we want. And American national identity is like, American national identity is just those who believe in America as an idea. That's our founding principles. And, they'll get mad about 1619 Project and stuff. The arguments against it will just simply say that a bunch of random people came together, no background, no ethnicity, nothing. They decided to invent a nation out of thin air with no cultural basis for it, no ethnic basis for it, no particular type of people who were here in forming that nation. And they simply said they just gobbled up some ideas and threw them up there. And that's what made America's these mere ideas. And this is what they're about. So it leaves many things wanting, and they try to dress themselves up and present themselves as new clothing, but it's same stuff that you'll see at CPAC. It's just at a more highbrow level. It's much more pussy than at CPAC. People at CPAC be like, we're gonna take on liberals, and they got like a shotgun, and they're like, I'm taking them on. It's like this Eric Greitens ad in Missouri. Eric Greitens is the maligned ex-governor of Missouri. Cancel culture tried to get at him for there was this hairdresser who, wanted to cheat on him with her, cheat on her husband. I'm messing up here. Cheat on her husband with Eric Greitens when he was governor. And, he made her pay the price for it. It was consensual. And then her husband found out about it. And then she claimed, it was rape. Well, believe it or not, women will just claim this stuff. But he later exonerated himself. He's now running for senator and against cancel culture. And he has this ad about like rhino hunting, your rhino hunting license. And he's like, they're like, have like guys in military gear, and they're like charging into a house. And you're like, okay, maybe this might be stupid, but it's definitely a kecking out loud moment. And you compare that to like we may think that there are some problems problems with immigration, and we believe in national self-determination, and liberal imperialism is bad, but so is Chinese imperialism, but so that's why we support liberal imperialism against China. And, this is what they're about. And it's like, okay, I'd rather have the Greitens guy talk about hand me a rhino hunting license than this bullshit that's promoted by the national conservatism and American conservative that's just like weak-willed, weak-kneed, just total like standard tripe you've always heard from conservative ink, but dressed up in new language and a new style, and there's nothing particularly interesting about it, and it doesn't reflect the Trumpist moment. The Trumpist moment, as I always wanted to say, was animated by white identity politics, was animated by belief in the great replacement, was animated by these ideas that these people are losing their country, and the country is more than a set of ideas and abstract principles or national self-determination. It is about the people who founded and built this country, and they feel that they're getting replaced by our liberal elites, and they want that change. And national conservatism does not address that. It's simply just, as I keep repeating myself, it's just dressing up conservative tripe in new clothing. And that's something that we need to acknowledge. Moving along, I'm now to discuss what one of the signers to this great piece, to this great statement of principles said, or a tweet thread he did on what has radicalized young conservatives and what is making them such dangerous thinkers, as this said. And this person is Nate Hochman. I've talked about him a lot on this podcast. Actually, the last time I talked about him, I praised his article about the supposed post-religious right in America and what that means for us and whether, it's true or not. And I think I did that like 2 weeks ago. But now I'm going to bring up what he's talking about, what has made young conservatives so radical. And I'm going to read this tweet thread in full because, you guys love me doing my readings today. And I think I, of course, said weed rather than read. So that's a mistake. It's not a highly respected unless I'm mispronouncing words. So this is what the thread he has on it. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'm going to read most of it. Hochman, writing a longish essay for The Atlantic this week. Wow, imagine that. A dangerous conservative writing for The Atlantic. About why young conservatives are so much more radical than their predecessors. I have my own suspicions about the root cause, obviously, but curious to hear the thoughts of other young righties on here. Why are we so crazy? I asked that myself. I've been chatting with some friends for this piece this week, and one viable explanation I've heard, consistent with my own pre-existing ideas, is that it's experiential. On campus, online, and in the streets, young conservatives are just encountering a much more hard-edged left. Many young conservatives can point to a radicalization moment. There's an analog to this on the left. Young leftists often say they were radicalized by the 2008 recession/failures of Obama administration, etc. For young cons, it often revolves around experiences on campus social media. I know it certainly did for me, as I've said many times before. I wasn't raised conservative, but I moved right in college largely because of my experience with the campus left. Anyways, all to say, what was your radicalization moment, or if you didn't have one, why not? My own basic take is that, like anything, there are various flavors of this phenomenon, some worse than others, but if you're a young con and spent 4 years on campus and came out the other side like, all we really need is tax cuts and more free speech, I have a bridge to sell you. So I think that's somewhat true, but I think that is like a much more narrow focus on people who are actually working in conservative politics of like their experiences on campus. My radicalization moment did not come from campus, but I graduated I was in college in the early 2010s when a lot of this stuff hadn't gone down. I mean, motivation for why I wrote No Campus for White Men was covering campus stories and seeing how crazy they were, and they were happening at state schools, not just places like Oberlin or Berkeley or these schools that always had left-wing reputations. It was happening like Missouri, and other state schools that you would have otherwise thought were fairly conservative. They were having these same campus insanity and driven by the left, and the administration was supporting it. So I sort of believe that may happen for people who are younger than me. I mean, that wasn't the case. I mean, my campus had no campus politics whatsoever when I was there, but I was already a radical right-winger when I was in college, so that happened independently. My explanation for this, I mean, yeah, there's some ways of a craziness that is going on among right-wingers and that they're responding in kind. And there is that the young people are seeing that the world that they're growing up with is really messed up, and they think, and unlike boomers and maybe Gen Xers who can then pretend like, well, this stuff ain't happening in my community and it ain't happening in my backyard, so everything's fine, and they turn on the old movies and America's great. They're winning World War II again in the old movies, and the military is awesome. We're saluting the troops because all we're seeing is these 1960s movies on World War II. That's for a lot of boomers as well. And they're able to divorce themselves from a lot of the world around them by living in a rural or suburban area. But for young people, millennials and Zoomers, they are confronted with that world on a daily basis, especially with Zoomers. Whenever I talk with younger people, whether they're in college or if they're in the military, and even some of these guys share the stories that they see from high school, and they talk about a lot of stuff that are just like nuts. Like they talk about, we had furries in our high school and they were demanding special privileges. I knew several kids who transitioned. We had to do like some ridiculous Juneteenth assignment or, something on a 1619 project and then like apologize for being white. And just all this massive type of social experiments and social programming that they're really trying to shove down on these kids is very different from when I was in high school and college. And, I'm not that old. I'm not an old man yet. Some people may think I'm ancient. I can't reveal my age, but I am not I'm not somebody who's been in college recently. But with some of these kids, they just tell these stories and I'm like, man, that's wild. And it's like, but for a lot of these kids, they just accept it. I see sometimes like teenagers walking around here. When I went to see Top Gun, I came out of the movie theater and there was all these teenagers there, and mask mandate's been gone for a long time. And there are all these teenagers standing outside of it, and all of them have masks on. And they weren't just like the total, like, stereotypical loser nerds or something. These looked like, standard teenagers. They all had the, those mulatto perm and other things, whatever. But they are all masked up, standing around, waiting there. And there's, like, nobody telling them to be masked up. They're just masked up for no reason. And so you see that they also accept a lot of this insanity. So if you're somebody who is conservative or right-leaning, you're so, even from like a standard kind of like Boomer Con or Ben Shapiro type conservative, you are so out of touch with the rest of your generation and what the rest of what young people are doing and what the school is promoting, that makes you even have to have a tougher skin and to be more open to radical ideas that are going to come towards you and you're going to come acquainted with because you're just seeing so much insanity around you. So I guess that's confirming it. But I mean, the simplest explanation I would say is like, why are there more of these radical ideas? Is two, and it's like larger developments happening. One, it's the internet, and people are learning about new ideas and coming into contact with ideas that they wouldn't have otherwise had without the internet. And that's been a development for 30 or so years. And now it's coming to fruition with social media. And now people just like imbibe ideas that, 20 years ago, they would have had no way to access it and no way to hear about it. All they would have been able to hear about when it comes to political ideas would have been from talk radio or cable news. Now they have much more options. And generally the internet is more of a place for radicalization than cable news and talk radio are. Even though talk radio was in the 90s pretty radical and pretty right-wing. But, compared to the internet, it's not. But that's also explains the left-wing radicalization is this internet and people getting into these ideas and stuff. But this isn't just like the internet coming about and plaguing a healthy society where it's the same society as the 1990s and the 80s, is that we've had such large cultural and social transformations over the last 40 years that, this is a completely different country. And people are much more atomized today than now, and that means that they're more likely to go on the internet, and then and I think a lot of people see problems around them. They always like talk about touching grass. And if you go outside and walk around, maybe go to your nearby mall, go to, just a nearby park, maybe not a park might be better, but like, let's go to a mall, where a lot of people are congregated. And I think you'll come away with a very grim assessment of America. I mean, you guys, I think some of you guys who follow our good friend Nemitz on Twitter, whenever he goes outside and touches grass, he's like, I've made a huge mistake. I mean, sometimes I think Nemitz is just exaggerating to make people laugh. But I mean, he sees like, real abominations going around. And you'll see, just like obesity at like unbelievable levels. I mean, our country, prior to the pandemic, we were over 41% obese. And I think after the lockdowns and stuff, it's got to be over 45% obese. And you'll just see, and people dress more like slobs than they ever did before. And people were already dressing like slobs, but now, like with lockdown, people are just like wearing pajamas out in the public and like, just looking like complete trash. And you see, and there's nothing really connecting with these people. And you see a lot more diversity. Whenever you look at teenagers, they're masked up. They're wearing more rap paraphernalia. They've got the perm on, and if you ever hear them talk, it's like it's Zoomer Ebonics, and you're just like, man, there's some real things going wrong in this country. Then you want to turn on the TV and be prepared for more black films by watching normal mainstream network TV. And like, wow, the only way I can actually get like an alternative, a positive alternative, is by being online. And if you actually interact with the country itself, if you go to a public event like a football game or the mall, movie theater, you'll just see, the decline before you. You will see that, by touching grass, you're actually, you probably would regret touching grass and just go back into your dwelling and not see the world around you and just build up this cocoon around you and pretend that everything's great and that this, the Top Gun America is still around, but it's not. And that's the same and I think with the boomers and some other people who are more optimistic about the future, I think they build these walls around them and they still see America in the way that they grew up in. And they interacted with a little bit, but not as much before. And generally with their media consumption, they're only seeing, they're not really, unless outside of advertisements, they're not really seeing the country as is, which if you go out to some of the more populous areas and you go to any public setting, you may regret your decision. And so I think that it's like those large cultural transformations that are happening. And I think with like some Gen Z, like Zoomers, I don't think the system is particularly offering them many things that are attractive. Because, I mean, mental illness is hitting sky high with Zoomers. There's so many problems with them that, that they can't really necessarily function in the same way in society that older people can. I mean, we don't want to diminish Zoomers and others, but, the mental health crisis is real. I think some of it is maybe that we're a society that encourages people to have mental illness and to feel like they're depressed and anxious or what have you. But, I mean, these are kids who are reporting it. There's nothing really for them to feel positive about or prideful about the country that they live in. These are kids who are growing up in their history lessons are all 1619 project style, and it's going to get worse for future generations. And they're left without any real identity. They listen to rap music, and maybe that's their only cultural focus, but it's not anything that's giving them a sense of a connection to a larger society or identity, unless they're non-white and they really cling to their ethnic identities that they have. But for whites, there's nothing for them. And then they get on the internet, and maybe they think there's something wrong with this, and the ideas that they're going to come into contact with on the internet are responding to the social and cultural malaise that's in this country. And I think Zoomers are more likely to be radical than the elders because the elders are still benefiting from the economic prosperity of America. Many of them have achieved the American dream. They've got a house. Maybe they've even got a summer home. They've got, 401k. They've got, they know that they will be there for when they retire, or they think they will be there when they retire. They've made it. While for Zoomers, I think it's much harder. And this was even a case with millennials. I don't think with millennials, I first went into the real world from college. There was like a sinking feeling with millennials that we were never going to achieve what Gen Xers and boomers had. And I think that feeling is even worse for Zoomers, and especially that a lot of the country also robbed 2 years of their youth, at least 2 years of the youth with the lockdowns and stuff. And, many of them were stuck into college or in their dorm in college, not able to party, not able to socialize. And I think that created, a lot of angst, a lot of concern for the future, and a lot of depression. And that made them rethink things. And so they come into contact much more with the decline than other generations on a day-to-day basis. And they're less confident in their ability to achieve the American dream than older generations who achieved it. And I think they may not even believe in the American dream. And I don't think the prosperity really holds out for them in the way that, it did for Gen Xers and for boomers. Younger people just don't think those opportunities are there for them in that wealth and prosperity. And literally, the wealth and prosperity keeps people happy in America. And there's still a ton of wealth and prosperity in America. And that's always one of the arguments I use, that we're not going to have a civil war or national divorce or anything like that, is that we're just way too prosperous. And many of the people who are most eager for this idea are the ones who are in prosperity. It's like a retiree who's got a massive 401k who's like, we need a national divorce now. And it's like, you're not the demographic that supports a national divorce. It's generally young people, but I think with young people, it's just more depressed and hopeless rather than, violent and aggressive and wanting to change the world. I think a lot of them are just more awash in the world. And the few conservatives around who want to change things, I just think that, talking about tax cuts and talking about Reagan and other these things they were anachronistic and silly and goofy when I was in college, but they're even less relevant today in campus politics. And campuses are much more engaged politically than they were in the early 2010s and 2000s. And that is making for these guys to have to make real decisions where they can either adopt this Ronald Reagan politics and just LARP as it's the 80s and walk around and pretend it's the 80s, or they can look at the world around them and realize that this is a very different world that requires a very different brand of politics. And I think that's why a lot of young people are changing their minds on this stuff. And this is somewhat of a white pill, is that, there are a lot of college Republican chapters and Federalist Society chapters that are now filled with people who think like us, who are into dissident right ideas. And this was unthinkable, even at the height of Trump, in 2016. This was unthinkable to imagine that there would be several college Republican chapters and several Federalist Society chapters that were into dissident right nationalist ideas. And now that's the case. And a lot of it probably is due to the campus politics, but it's also due to the massive social and cultural changes we've witnessed in America, and to the development of the internet and people being online more and coming into contact into ideas they wouldn't have 20 or 30 years ago. So now for my final topic before the cognitive elite question, I'm delivering another white pill. The French parliamentary elections were pretty keyed. The National Front, well, now they're in the National Rally, increased their representation in parliament from just 8 seats to 89 seats. They're now the third largest party in parliament. Even among the popular vote in France, they were a fairly close third to the two biggest parties. One is Macron's centrist party, and then Mélenchon's far left party. Were both around 25-26%, and then National Front got a little over 19%. And it looked like they were only going to get 20 to 40 seats, but they instead got 89, and they are now even larger than the center-right Republicans in the amount of seats that they were apportioned. And Macron's party is still the biggest party, but they got caught up with the left-wing party as well. And there are now unique advantages to this. There's a 15-seat threshold that the French Parliament has, that before you can get some good things happen for you. If you reach the threshold, you get more time to speak, more you get to able to form your own parliamentary group, and you get office space, meeting room, and you get public funding. And now that's all available to Marine Le Pen's party. And this is all done with Zemmour's Reconquest Party running as well in the parliamentary elections. And the Reconquest Party, I don't think they won any seats. Both Marion Marshall Le Pen, Marine Le Pen's niece, I almost said nephew, Marine Le Pen's niece didn't win her seat. Zemmour didn't win a seat. And they came close to it, but they didn't win it. And now the National Rally, formerly known as National Front, is going to take the center stage, and now they're the preeminent force on the far right and nationalist right in France. There are this is mostly good things, even though I think we would prefer Zemmour. Zemmour is more of our kind of guy, is that he is not trying to engage in economic or populist economics like Marine Le Pen is. He is directly talking about great replacement and the demographic issues and solely focused on immigration. And he's very intellectual and saying these things in a very highbrow manner, while also a manner that the average person can get. But he doesn't, maybe just didn't have the party infrastructure, and maybe that the working class preferred Le Pen over Zemmour due to her more established credentials of populist economics. And even with Le Pen, like the new party, the National Rally, was like condemning, like, no, we can't talk about great replacement or the idea of great replacement. And they're trying to be more squishy on these issues. They're still pretty good on these issues. And even Macron and his party are taking some of the issues from the far right nationalists in France and adopting them. They're trying to crack down on Islam. Macron himself is talking about more immigration restriction, but not to the same extent that Zemmour and the National Rally are talking about that. I keep wanting to call them National Front, but the National Rally. And they just that is much more pushing these ideas. So now that they have overtaken the center right, that's a big deal, because the Republicans, same name. Well, all these parties changed their name several times, and even with the left-wing factions, the Socialist Party used to be the big center-left party. Now it's pretty much gone. And there was, I think, the Communists, or I forget which party Mélenchon came from, and now it's Mélenchon's party, which he just crafted, I think, over the last few years, is now the second biggest party. And also Macron's party, which he invented in 2017 after breaking away from the socialists, is the largest. And the Republicans have changed their name several times. It's the descendant of the Gaullist party. And they are, they got crushed in the election. They barely got, I think they got 11% in the popular vote. And they're now pretty much dwarfed by National Rally. And I think National Rally signaling that they're the only nationalist force in town, that they're going to have to let the Zemmour types come in and probably strengthen the party. And maybe a lot of Republicans are going to move over, realizing that they're the stronger force rather than the Republicans. So it's looking up for the French nationalists. And I think this is mostly a white pill for that, is that seeing that, there's been a lot of talk about how national populism is dead, or nationalism is on the wane in Europe, and that they're moving towards centrist or even left-wing types. But the massive success of National Rally in the parliamentary elections signal otherwise. And also, I think it's a reminder that you still have to be involved in politics and normal politics. There's a lot of talk in America, especially in our right-wing circles, about how you just need to drop politics. We're post-political. We're not involved in the election system at all. No party politics for us. And then they just talk about, we'll write novels or something. And then that will change the culture, is that if you publish a novel, America will be transformed instantly. And some of these people are better yet, you're moving into a shack in the woods, and somehow that's changing the culture. Really, I think we all realize that one election is not going to completely change America, but you have to be involved in the process in order to wake people up and to be involved in these issues. Because otherwise, if you're not involved, you're simply accepting the way things are in the status quo, and the status quo will change to make your life worse and to make your escapism, that it may have been feasible, when you did it, but then over time they're going to be demanding more requirements on you. They're going to be putting more standards on you and more restrictions. Maybe you say you're homeschooling your kids, they eliminate homeschool. Well, you're not involved in politics. There's nobody else to speak out for you, so your escape is done. And the state can do that. The status quo can be imposed on you. if you're not involved in the political process at all. And now you may say, like, well, these things aren't solved with one election, so I'm just done with it in general. That's not how politics works. It happens over time. It's going to be a long, protracted battle, and you still have things happen. And when Nigel Carlsbad and I did our podcast on the European New Right, we mentioned how stupid and idiotic it was the European New Right didn't link up with the National Front, which it was still the National Front at that time, because the National Front was pushing these nationalist, immigration restrictionist ideas in the public. This is how the public was being made aware of New Right ideas. And the New Right's like, no, we're just going to hold conferences and be above politics. And they quickly became irrelevant. Well, now National Rally, over many years of time, their ideas are now at the forefront of French politics. They're even influencing the major parties outside of them, and they're now bigger than the establishment center-right party. And that could still happen with America. Imagine if all these America First candidates began outnumbering the standard establishment Republicans. Imagine all the great things they could accomplish then. Of course, this is a long, protracted battle. It's not just going to be like one election, like, wow, we won the presidency, it's over. I think we learned that from Trump. It's going to be a continuous struggle over time. And the best avenue that we have to influence the public and to change the world is still the normal political process. And until people actually articulate a different idea of this that is not simply escape into the woods or write a novel, or I don't know what they have, as like this is way more important than politics, when it's just reaching like a few hundred people and it's the narrow ghetto that you're already in. Until there's a serious alternative to the normal political process being proposed and is actually serious, and a serious alternative that can rally people around, it's still the normal political process that's the best means for influencing the world and changing the world. Now on to the cognitive elite question. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the highly respected cognitive elite option at highly respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And while you're there, make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements if you already haven't. And this question comes from Johnny Chungus, and he asks, thoughts on the Texas 34 special election and Elon Musk preemptively endorsing DeSantis for president in 2024. So the Texas special election is pretty interesting. Mayra Flores, a Republican, won a district that is over 80% Hispanic, and a lot of conservatives are soy jacking over this. I mean, it is pretty remarkable election that's happened. It's being redistricted, though. It's going to be a more Democratic district because they're taking away the more Republican parts and putting them in all their districts. So Mayra Flores, she'll be congresswoman for at least till the end of the year. We'll see if she can still hold off and win in November. It'll be a lot tougher for her. It's going to be a much more Democratic district, but she did win by over 9 points in this special election, which is pretty remarkable that she was able to accomplish that. And really what it's driven by, I think it's like, Democrats it's both weaknesses with the Democrats and the general public, and particularly with Hispanics, particularly in South Texas. And what the general public is like, Democrats literally have nothing to campaign on. They have, let's look, the only hope they have is abortion and guns and January 6th. That is it. And none of these three things deal with the economy at all. And people are suffering badly from the economy. I mean, gas is up, at least doubled since Democrats have taken over, and it's likely going to triple and maybe quadruple. I don't know. It might be really bad if it quadruples, but it's going to be, gas may go up all the way to $8 nationally soon, maybe even higher. And that's a serious penalty on American people. And also food prices are going up, rent and home costs are going up. There's a lot of economic problems. We're likely in the middle. We're about to start a recession. I mean, pretty much all forecasts are saying this, even though Biden doesn't want to admit this. And and even for people in Texas, even though many of these people are in South Texas, we have an open border that the Biden administration doesn't want to do anything about. We just had, numbers came out for May just last week, and we had another record surge of migrants coming through. Almost 250,000 migrants were caught when they entered the country. And this is not counting the ones who got away. And it's also not understanding that a lot of these people were not deporting, and if Title 42 goes away, we're not going to be deporting anyone for the most part. And so there's just so many, and then we have crime that's skyrocketing, and Democrats don't want to do anything about it. They still want to demonize police and let these criminals be free without cash bail and just wander around and attack innocent people without any consequence. So there's so many things happening with the Democrats that are just going wrong in this country, and it's going to be blamed as the majority party. They have nothing to offer to people besides, maybe if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, they can have an issue with, they're trying to eliminate, they can say Republicans are trying to eliminate abortion. That's why we've got to vote Democrat so we can pass a constitutional amendment legalizing abortion or whatever. That's probably not going to happen. But maybe they hope that could be one thing. They're trying to say guns, but even the terrible Republican bill that they're pushing forward, which fortunately doesn't look like will go anywhere, it is defanging the Democrats on this issue. And then January 6th, nobody cares about January 6th anymore. So they have literally nothing to campaign on. They want to call Republicans domestic terrorists, and they're just talking about how our democracy may be at an end in November. And people are just like, I've had enough. I'm tired of paying $6 for gas. Maybe they're probably be paying more by the time of November. And I think this is just going to be a massive red wave. I don't think even Democrats aren't even arguing that they're going to have successful results. They're just kind of just trying to mitigate the disaster that will happen in November. And so this is part of that. I mean, this is a bellwether for saying, Republicans are do very well if they're winning. I think it's an 85% Hispanic district, and they're winning it by over 9 points in a special election. It's never happened before. I think things are looking very good. And even for the Hispanics in South Texas, Flores ran on a standard conservative message. Like, she wasn't promising amnesty to the illegals. She wasn't just trying to talk about how illegals built this country or a nation of immigrants. She simply ran on a very conservative message. I think her simple message was like God, family, country. She strongly opposed the illegal immigration, wanted to build the wall, have more border security, and more law enforcement, more law and order. She proudly touted that she's married to a Border Patrol agent. So I think she ran on a message that, you could run on, and even in like Alabama. The only difference is I think there was more Spanish language ads that Flores was putting out there, and she won handily. So it's showing that, Republicans don't really have to pander that much to win over some minority groups. I don't think this is a sign that like all Hispanics are coming over, but there is a sizable element of 30 to 40% that are going to start being staunchly Republican. A lot of them are Tejanos, Cubans, of course, South Americans. They're becoming very strongly Republican. I don't think that's the same for Puerto Ricans and a lot of the new Central Americans who are coming here to this country. And even if you're looking at the results in like Virginia, they always talked about how, Youngkin won over so many minorities with his message. And this shows that the multicultural, multiracial working class is in effect. But actually his numbers were lower than that of Trump's in 2020 among both Asians and Hispanics, slightly lower. But the main message that they got from the Youngkin campaign is that we are winning over Hispanics and Asians. And it's like, well, you only won over like a third of them. It was primarily winning over suburban whites that made the difference, and also a really high turnout for rural whites. So it's like when you look at these elections, yes, you're winning over a strong amount of Hispanics in certain areas, but still whites are the majority of your party and the people you need to mainly focus on to get them out and vote. And you shouldn't alter your message just to appeal to Asians and Hispanics. You should just run on the same message that you're running towards whites: law and order, strong border, no amnesty, sensible economic policies, sensible energy policies. Just a standard conservative message, are a little bit better than a conservative message, an America First message. And you can win, results, and you can have great results that you see in the Texas special election and in Virginia gubernatorial race and anywhere else in this country. And that's real the message from that I think that they should take hold. But of course, they're going to talk about how we need to do even more minority outreach and pander more to them due to this race, when it really just shows if you get somebody from the community, run them on a pretty strong conservative message, they can do well. The one exception, I think, is with black communities. They're not going to vote Republican. I think just for a select few Hispanic communities, and probably with some of the Asian communities out in California, you can have similar results. Now on Elon Musk, Ron DeSantis, I thought this was very cringe. I mean, it's nice that it shows that Elon Musk is becoming more conservative, but clearly he's not voting for Trump, because that would be a bridge too far for him. So he says, I'm thinking about DeSantis. And Papa's thinking was, of course, soy jacking over this because Heavy D, oh my God, Heavy D and Elon Musk, oh my God, let's go. And they're going into this. I don't think it's particularly very serious, the endorsement of who he's leaning towards. He'll say it's like some other centrist, or it's like DeSantis is too much for him. What's really more important with Elon Musk is that he completes his deal with Twitter, and he actually buys Twitter, and he doesn't back out of it. As long as he stays a free speech supporter, that's what I mainly care about with Elon Musk. And that if he allows Trump back onto Twitter, which he said he will, and that's really what the important things were. With DeSantis versus Trump, I've belabored this point too many times, but everyone who's thinking that DeSantis is, Trump, DeSantis is going to destroy Trump in 2024, just doesn't understand how these things work. I mean, here's what the thing is, and people keep bringing up these examples like, well, in 2008, it looked like Hillary Clinton was going to win, or nobody predicted Trump was going to be the candidate in 2016. And it's like, well, all the polling before Trump showed up was that he was not going to have much support, and no one predicted he was actually going to run. Then he ran, and then his message, put him at the top of the polls, and he was at the top of the polls for the longest time. DeSantis actually getting the race is not as unthinkable as Trump getting in the race. And there's also a difference with the charisma factor. We'll go to the 2008 with Obama jumping in. Hillary Clinton was unlikable even among Democrats. She has a horrible personality, no charisma. She's very extremely unlikable. Obama, extremely charismatic. And he also had people really wanted this idea to vote for the first black president. He was able to offer that fantasy to many people. With DeSantis, he is a less charismatic copy of Trump. Like, all of his mannerisms are Trump. All of his one-liners are he's trying to be like Trump. I mean, he even when he's talking, he moves his hand just like Trump. It's a bad carbon copy of Trump with who's having to rely on note cards. He can't just speak off the cuff, and he's not funny like Trump. Like his line about I accept the endorsement of African Americans like Elon Musk. Like, it was so canned, and everyone was doing forced laughter at his line about this. It's just, he does not have what it takes to bring down Trump, because he does not have any charisma. And people all think well, it's just policies. Like, conservatives for some reason want to get hostile and cannot accept the idea that charisma and personality matter more than policies and politics, or not necessarily politics, but policies in campaign politics. Whoever's the more charismatic, more likable, more personal person, the person who's more likely to inspire people is generally going to be the one who wins. That's what happened in 2008. It's what happened in 2016, and that's what's going to happen in 2024 if Trump runs again and DeSantis tries to throw his hat in the ring. Just imagine in a debate where DeSantis is imitating Trump's mannerisms and giving out these canned one-liners, and Trump just sears through it and it exposes him. It's not going to be good for DeSantis. So, on that note, as I always like to say, for Elon Musk saying he's interested in him and he's leaning towards him, whatever. It's nice that there's a billionaire, the wealthiest man in the world is open to right-wing politics and is open to someone like DeSantis, who's a pretty good governor. But when it comes to the politics of 2024, Trump's still going to be the nominee if he runs, and DeSantis will definitely not defeat him if they run against each other. So that is it for today's episode. We're going to have an incredible IQ supplement later this week, so tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.